In this section, we will talk about the primary volitional neural circuits that are involved in top-down governance of our actions and our minds. These are the circuits that underlie human free will by imposing constraints on thought or action paths that we can also think of as top-down criteria for future actions or thought. Let's again compare the image of the whole cortex and areas within it that are highly correlated in their activity, shown here, with a finer grain analysis of the neural circuits from the review article we discussed last time, shown here. If we consider the dorsal attentional network, or DAN, shown in green here, and in green here, we can see that there is a nice correspondence between the two cortical maps. Remember that the areas shown with the same color on the left side image vary together in their activity. Even though they're not necessarily adjacent areas of cortex, they're connected with long axons that drive neurons in other areas that share the same color. This neural circuitry includes the frontal eye fields, or FEF, shown here, the intraparietal circuits, or IPS, of the superior parietal lobule, or SPL, shown here, and it includes the middle temporal motion complex known as MT+. The dorsal attentional network is thought to link the shifting of attention, as well as eye movements, to salient stimuli in the outside world, defined in particular by changes in luminance associated with motion in the visual domain. But since salience is in part specified by what one chooses to pay attention to, say one's looking for a dog, thus making dogs more salient, the dorsal attentional network is in part subject to volitional control. Another way that this circuitry is subject to volitional control is top-down inhibition. For example, if someone very attractive should come into view, but you don't want people to know that you find them attractive, you can inhibit yourself from making an eye movement to this person, even when a part of you wants to look at them. Indeed, some people have argued that volitional attention evolved as a replication of the neural circuitry involved in making volitional saccades. They have said that it would be dangerous for a beta male, for example, to actually look at the alpha male, who might take this staring to be a threat display, leading the alpha male to beat the beta male up. Instead, the beta male can instead keep the internal invisible fovea of attention on his object of interest without overtly giving away what his thoughts are about, and so he can avoid the wrath of the alpha male. Now, I don't know if volitional attention in fact evolved as a replication of volitional eye movement circuitry, but it is a reasonable idea supported by the overlap found in brain circuitry when either shifting attention or the eyes. Be that as it may, the dorsal attentional network is one of the two volitional executive circuits that are central to human volition and free will. The other volitional circuit, or perhaps pair of circuits involved in top-down imposition of constraints on thought and action, are the frontoparietal control network, or FPCN, shown in red here, and the cinguloopercular control network, shown here in orange. The frontoparietal control network is central to top-down cognitive control. If it couples with the dorsal attentional network, it plays a role in the volitional control of attention and eye movements as one plans actions in the perceived world. And if it couples instead with the default network, it plays a role in deliberating about one's future actions in the internally simulated worlds of one's imagination. This neural circuit includes part of the rostrolateral prefrontal cortex, or RLPFC, shown here, that we previously talked about when we talked about Brodmann Area 10 and its role in our most abstract planning, such as planning what we want to do next year. It also includes the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DLPFC, which we've talked about in the context of working memory and the carrying out of mental operations, like, say, imagining a human body with a lion's head. It also includes the anterior inferior parietal lobule, shown here, which we have considered as potentially realizing a global salience map. It also includes this region anterior to the supplementary motor area called pre-SMA, involved in high-level planning and programming of future bodily actions, and the inferior temporal gyrus, or ITG, which is part of the ventral stream concerned with representing the shapes and identities of objects in the world. Working in close tandem operation with the frontoparietal control network is the cinguloopercular control network, or COCN. In a previous lecture, we discussed how the former is likely involved in deciding on which task to execute next and switching among such tasks, whereas the cingulo-opercular circuit is likely involved in keeping one on task and detecting errors when one has strayed from the task at hand. This circuit includes the dorsal portion of the anterior cingulate, or DACC shown here, as well as the medial superior frontal cortex, or MSFC, and bilateral anterior insula, or AI, which is also called the frontal operculum. That's where we get the name cingulo-opercular in cingulo-opercular control network from. So far, we have only discussed modes of thought that occur while a person is awake, but we spend roughly a third of our lives asleep, and of that time, about 2 hours a night is spent dreaming, especially during the phase of sleep known to occur with rapid eye movements, or REM sleep. Volition generally plays little role in normal dreaming, so it might be thought of as a form of non-volitional imagination. Indeed, many people have noticed that there are similarities between dreaming while asleep and daydreaming while awake. Here are two representations of the brain showing areas that increase in activity during REM sleep, shown in red in both cases, and areas that are downregulated, shown in blue. While these images are a bit different, what they both show is that the medial temporal portion of the default network is activated, and the lateral prefrontal areas known to be involved in top-down volitional control are deactivated. This medial temporal portion of the default network can also be activated while awake, when one is daydreaming. Recently, in a remarkable study, Ursula Voss and colleagues applied alternating current to the scalp above the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex while people were dreaming. Remember, the DLPFC tends to be turned off during REM sleep, with another electrode placed over the temporal lobes. When they stimulated current to flow between these electrode poles in the low gamma range, or in the 40 Hertz range, people effectively woke up inside their dreams and could take volitional control of the contents of their dreams. Dr. Voss artificially induced lucid dreaming, where a person realizes that they are dreaming and can then make things happen in their dream that they volitionally choose to happen. Here's an image from a paper by a researcher called Dressler that shows the areas of the brain that tend to be more active during lucid dreaming than during the normal non-lucid dreaming of REM sleep. This involves the volitional circuitry of the lateral frontal lobe and other parts of the frontoparietal control network. So, although dreaming tends not to be volitional, there is one important exception, namely lucid dreaming, where dreaming is volitional. And it becomes volitional by activating the very circuitry that underlies volitional processing in the lateral frontal lobes when we're awake. As we can see from this lucid dreaming example, non-volitional processes can be influenced by volitional processes. Together, these circuits permit the brain to take volitional control of what it thinks, imagines, and does by imposing top-down constraints or criteria that have to be met by bottom-up processing. These constraints or criteria are ultimately realized in a neural code that permits the setting of criteria in synaptic weight changes, which is itself ultimately realized in the release of neuromodulators that change the conductances of specific channels, such as the NMDA receptors that we learned about. To me, it is a cognitive architecture as beautiful in its macroscopic and microscopic architecture as any cathedral or symphony ever created. Of course, it is this evolved information processing and neural architecture that affords just such creations of the human mind.